It's populating, but slowly.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's session of The Generations More in Common Than Not. My name is Robin Fenley, and I'm chair of the Subcommittee on Older Women for the New York City Committee on Aging, and look forward to hearing what promises to be a very engaging and insightful session. First, I'd like to thank Susan Summers, chair of INPEA, for hosting us on INPEA's platform, and also to two student interns from Fordham and Columbia Universities, respectively, Erica Udow and Rachel Matarazzo, for assisting us with technical aspects of this session. Their generosity of time and expertise of this team has been invaluable. Thank you to our many sponsors. Your support means so much to the work, and it really demonstrates that it takes a village to make anything happen. This event would be nothing without our panel of experts, Carol Ajengo and Betty Levy, whom many of you no doubt recognize from their years of working to advance the rights of older persons. And this year, we're really excited to have Lelia join us to expand our conversation on generational similarities and synergies toward actualizing the human rights of women of all ages. Our moderator today, Ramsey Alwyn, is president and CEO of the National Council on Aging. She's a seasoned thought leader and policy advocate, leading a nationwide movement to ensure equitable aging for all, understanding that aging begins at birth. As we'll hear today, Ramsey's very gifted at sparking conversations about the resources, that every individual deserves to age well, and what needs to change to ensure that all have access. It's now my pleasure to turn the program over to Ramsey. Ramsey, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Robin, and thank you for all your leadership in leading the Older Women Subcommittee of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York. Today's session truly wouldn't be possible if it weren't for your leadership, your tireless leadership of elevating the issues of older women and all women, all ages and life stages is an inspiration. Kudos and thank you, Robin. And welcome to you all for joining us today. You've joined an exciting conversation. We've carved out this unique opportunity for us to bring together women that span a range of generations, to share intergenerational perspectives on the power of advocacy in changing the world in which we live in and advancing the rights of women at all ages and life stages, and really looking at that intersectionality of women at the intersection of race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, geography, and a variety of other dimensions of our demographics. We'll hear about individual experiences, we'll hear advice, we'll hear insight that span at least three generations while we're together, including a respondent who's been in the thick of advocacy her entire career and will give us some great tangible advice to make the most of the next 2 weeks we have together. The panelists will highlight lessons learned about the unfinished business of ensuring the rights of women and girls, with a special focus on this year's CSW themes: innovation and technology, education in the digital age, and achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, as well as challenges and opportunities in achieving gender equality and the empowerment of rural women and girls. You'll hear in their experiences and perspective on the issues. So our panelists are Carol Ajenga and Layli. We don't include Layli's last name in order to protect her privacy. And as a matter of fact, my apologies, preferred pronouns for Laylee are their, them, and they. To tie it all together, Betty Levy will respond to what Carol and Laylee will share, with special emphasis on the opportunity to make the most of the Commission on the Status of Women to further advance the rights of all women and girls. But first, a quick introduction of each of our incredible contributors today. Carol is a multilingual human rights lawyer and gender expert. She's a negotiator, people connector, mentor, and policy influencer. In her current role, she's lead for global initiatives and Africa region representative at Help Age International. We're so pleased to have Carol with us today. Laylee is a 17-year-old Girl Scout from a small rural town in Northern California. Laylee is attending the Committee on the Status of Women as a Girl Scout youth delegate. Kudos. Girl Scouts is a huge part of Laylee's life. They have been in the program since the age of 6, now serving both as a regional and national delegate. Working with young girls has been a huge privilege in their life, and it motivates them to create a better future for youth. At Laylee's school, they serve as the student board representative, covering issues that students care about, including sexual violence on campus and equitable access to bathroom facilities. Betty Levy will join us as respondent to today's conversation. Betty is currently the main representative to the UN New York SOAR Optimist International, a large international volunteer women's rights organization with headquarters in the UK. SOAR Optimist International is present in over 120 countries and 3,000 communities. Betty's New York based, and she's also involved in the global organizing partner for the Women's Majority Group and a proud member of the NGO Committee on Aging, Older Women's Subcommittee. Prior to starting Betty's advocacy work at the United Nations in 2011, she had a career of over 40 years as a mental health professional and manager for the New York State Office of Mental Health and Maryland Department of Mental Hygiene. As a civil society rep, she served in a number of NGO committees and work groups, including serving as vice chair of the NGO Commission on the Status of Women, co-chair of NGO Commission on the Status of Women's Forum, member of executive committees for NGO Commission on Social Development and UN 2020. Just an incredible set of experience to help inform and activate us today. Thanks to all three for joining us. Let's go ahead and start by getting Carol and Laylee's perspective on the barriers they see that women across the generations experience, young and old. Welcome, Laylee.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm so excited to be here. So just to jump right into it, barriers I see facing girls and young women, where I live in California, in the United States in the West, I really see girls being defined by consumerism. In order to increase profits for various corporations and companies, false insecurities are being marketed to girls. Anecdotally, I can say that I see a new body flaw and its subsequent fix being marketed to girls every month, every week, whether it be buccal fat removal, lip flips, juice cleanses. All of these things are marketing that are being peddled to girls as young as 6 or 7. This forces girls to be more focused on their appearance rather than academic, social, or emotional success. Academically, girls are also facing barriers, whether it be period poverty, that forces 1 in 10 girls globally to miss school while they're menstruating, or stigma in pursuing certain subjects like STEM. Girls are really being held back from achieving the same achievements that their male peers are. To understand why girls aren't achieving emotional success, contentment, or fulfillment, we really have to take a step back and look at what girls go through while we aren't looking. We know that 1 in 3 women experience technology-facilitated gender-based violence. With those numbers, we can understand that girls are also facing this, but in digital gender-based violence against girls is underrecorded, it's underreported, and it's misunderstood. we really have no idea what the long-term effects of digital gender-based violence are on girls, but we do know that it can be completely devastating to their psyche, and the issue is under-researched and understood.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your thoughts in terms of the range of the issues that girls are experiencing today. It's quite incredible. Would love to hear your perspective on the issues. Carol, are you able to join us?
Yes, Ramsey, I'm not so sure what has happened to my video. It's on, but it's not showing. So I'm a bit, and I don't want to try and fiddle with it now because it may get me off the meeting completely. I hope it will pop up at some time. And Layli, it is a pleasure to meet you virtually and to hear from you. I must say that you represent the hope that women need, because some of the issues that you have raised as barriers continue in later life, and they kind of get strongly rooted in the structure of life. I'll just take the issue of STEM, for example. When you exclude young girls from taking on STEM as a course in education, then later on in life, they have no chance to get into the STEM related careers because the foundations of that were messed up with when they were younger. And so this intergenerational linkage is seen from the things that Layli has so powerfully spoken about. The issues of access to menstrual hygiene, access to toilet facilities and stuff like that. You're not able to then reverse this later on in life because it becomes totally rooted in the way that society then views women. So I'd like to look at the barriers from three main perspectives. One, from a point of discrimination, and that speaks to what I've just responded to from Layli's presentation. The discrimination against girls is a barrier that is so strong, and it grows into the discrimination against little girls, teenage girls, young adults, and older women. It just goes through the life course approach. The second level of the second barrier, which is also linked to the discrimination, plays out in the violence, abuse, and neglect that young girls face and grows right into their old age. And we see violence being meted out on girls simply because they are girls, and later on on older women simply because they are older women. And so we have gender-based violence that is very age-related, and it plays out through the life course approach. Then the third pillar that I would speak to is just on the basis of the affront to the dignity of women. And this comes from a deep sense of patriarchy, where then there's a sense that it is okay to abuse a girl because she's a girl, or it's okay to abuse a woman because it's a woman. It's okay to abuse her dignity. It's okay to stand in her way simply because she's a girl or a woman. And these are things that then get so deeply rooted that by the time we reach the older ages, it becomes almost nightmarish trying to break down those structures that are deeply rooted. And therefore, this intergenerational conversation is extremely important. And I hope we'll get to the point of trying to look at how to begin to dismantle this structure that so bedevils girls and women later on in their lives.
Well, thank you, Carol. Thank you for helping us sort of zoom out and recognize it is about a life course approach, and these foundational experiences that we talk about in those early years of being a girl, all of it compounds and all of it is brought to bear as we age as women, and those systemic barriers and the discrimination only becomes greater. Well, let's pivot now and let's explore the expectations you feel society puts on you as a woman of a certain age and a certain life stage. We've got some generational representation here, but Layla, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure. So expectations I see put on girls and young women is just the expectation to be very palatable at all times. Girls aren't really allowed to be emotional when discussing issues, even if they are really deeply affected by them personally. And then if a young girl takes like charge on a project, she's considered bossy instead of a leader. And in that regard, girls are expected to mature much faster than their male peers, forcing them to take on responsibilities that they really aren't ready for, and allowing the infantilization of men to affect women into adulthood.
So profound. And just interested in your Girl Scout experience, and how that's helping you transcend some of these realities. I'll share. I was a Girl Scout. I was a Brownie Scout, and loved it. And then when I had two daughters, I got back involved as a Daisy Scout troop leader, and the experiences of Girl Scouts USA to really provide early and often the opportunity to get to deepen our sense of agency and find our voice is so powerful. And just interested in your reflections on how Girl Scouts has contributed.
I really am incredibly grateful to be a Girl Scout. Like it was said in my intro, I've been a Scout since I was 6, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Like I've said, like was said in my bio, I'm from a small town in California, and I really don't think I would have been given as many of the opportunities as I've been able to like do and attend if I wasn't a Girl Scout. I've done everything from STEM programs at colleges to backpacking the Trinity Alps to coming to New York for United Nations Conference. Truly, Girl Scouts has showed me that the sky's the limit and I can do anything that I put my mind to. And it's really taught me how to be a leader and how to engage with my community in a way that's productive, in a way that can improve the society that we live in.
So important for all women and girls. And Carol, what are your expectations that you feel, that you try to transcend as you reflect on how society has seen us as women of a certain age and life stage? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it still speaks to that. The expectations kind of mutate and grow as you grow older. The expectation to be quiet, the expectation to dress in a certain way. You're a woman of a certain age, and so you should carry yourself around in a certain way. Expectations to literally carry the world on your shoulders, the expectation to be responsible for the mistakes of others. For example, when I like giving this example around sexual violence, when you have a case, for example, of rape, in many instances you will find that it's the girl who will be asked, what were you wearing? Why were you out at that time of night? Whereas it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that there's security at all times, so that a girl can walk out at any time that she wants to go out. So there are all these expectations, and the expectations, for example, that the lady spoke about being told you're bossy when you're assertive, that does not end. It still continues later on in life, and you almost have to be apologetic for being good at what you do. You have to be, you have to kind of shrink yourself from and prevent yourself from being the best you can be. So those barriers still stand in a way, and depending culture to culture. There's some cultures that are more aggressive in terms of how they address women, especially women who are succeeding, and there are cultures that are less aggressive, but basically we go through the same things. And I don't think that it really matters where in the world you are. It's just the context that differs, whether you're in Australia or Africa or the US, the same barriers continue to follow women throughout their life course.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Carol. And actually, our tech assistance team is saying you're coming in and out, Carol. If you turn off your background, if you go into preference and turn off that background, it may help address the video interference. If you want to go ahead and try that. I hope we didn't just lose Carol by providing that assistance. As Carol's getting back on, wanted to now take the conversation in another direction. We have this unique opportunity of a range of generational perspectives to explore the issues. And as the title of the session, More in Common Than Not, suggests, we'd love to explore a little bit the roles older and younger women play in your lives. And Layla, if you want to kick us off and share some of your perspective on that.
Yeah, so older women have always been very special mentors to me. My grandmother has been a loving, supportive, and informative force my whole life. She's recorded my whole life, whether in video or in scrapbook. Growing up, she never had access to the opportunities I have now, both because she was a woman growing up in the 60s and the 50s, and because she really lived in extreme poverty. So every day she really shows me how lucky I am to have access to all the opportunities I have and encourages me to pursue everything that comes my way. And then, like it was said in my bio, I am able to mentor younger girls, which is so special. I've been able to shift some of their mindsets away from focusing on their appearance and more on focusing on how they are as people and how they contribute to their communities, which really is so special and rewarding for me. And being able to shape the next generation of Girl Scouts has been like an invaluable experience to me.
Well, how fortunate are we all to have you being so intentional, looking both ahead in the continuum and behind in the continuum, and seeing the opportunity to mentor and to engage women and girls of all ages. And really, when I reflect on it, for all of us in our own lives, it's all interrelated. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, sisters. There's no arbitrary compartmentalizing of these relationships. It's just family, it's just community. And there's no reason to separate those generations in policy conversations either. I think about the Grey Panthers and just the rabble-rousing role the Grey Panthers play and their motto of really age and youth in action. We need more opportunities to exercise those intergenerational solidarity opportunities because we do have so much in common, and all of our relationships along the continuum of life and experience shape us into who we are today. Welcome back, Carol. I hope you're able to hear us. We were just talking a bit about the roles older and younger women play in our lives, and would love to get your thoughts on the roles older and younger women play in your life.
I think, I'm sorry for that. I don't know what's happening with my tech today. And maybe I'll enlist the help of Lelia to help me manage the tech challenges. Yeah, but I think the roles that older and younger women play in my life, I think I'll look at it from two ways. One is the lessons that cuts across both the young and the old, because there are many lessons to learn from younger women, and there are many lessons to learn from older women, as well as my peers, because the experiences we all go through maybe are different contextually. They may be around the same issue, but the different contexts help us to learn and to grow in our ways of handling things, even though the context may be different. So that's one thing that cuts across both. From younger women, I think there's a lot of knowledge that I get, especially on tech. I have a 9-year-old granddaughter who teaches a lot about technology, gets me onto TikTok every now and then. And for a long time, I dismissed something like TikTok as more of a game. But I think it's such a powerful tool for messaging and for advocacy, in addition to all the other platforms that exist, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, I think that TikTok is a little underestimated, especially by older people. That's something that I would say is a good lesson. But I think the other thing that I learned from younger people is it allows me to reflect on some of the things that I could have done better. Looking at my 20-year-old self, for example, what could I have done better? And it allows me then to reflect this back into the lives of the younger women that I engage with. But for older women, there's a lot of wisdom that with older women. There's a lot of knowledge that sits with older women. And I love to tap into that knowledge because it's knowledge that is also fast eroding. It's going away. And so I love to tap into the knowledge that older women have based on their experiences. And we cannot deny that anyone's experiences, that's real, that's a reality. And so if you can do something from it and use it to better your life, then the better. So that's the other thing that I learned from older women. The final thing that I learned from older women is also, if I put it on the same scale as reflecting back on my 20-year-old self, I look at older women and learn from the experiences so that when I get to their age, then I'm able to handle some of the things that they've handled. And for me, that's pretty important because we are all aging, including the young women such as Lelia. So my desire is that when Lelia becomes an older woman, she then have to face the challenges that I'm facing as I would call myself a middle-aged woman, of what an older woman is facing right now. And so it's important that we manage some of these challenges so that we make it easier for younger women to step into older ages without the challenges that the older women are currently facing.
Yes, that ageism and that discrimination is so insidious, and it runs the gamut. She's too young to lead the organization.
Yes.
She's too old to learn the new fill in the blank technology. So
yeah.
It's so harmful to us all and so unproductive. And to your point, Carol, we're discriminating against our future selves. If we're all so fortunate to get that gift of longevity, that will be us soon enough. So Leila, from your perspective, what do you think are the issues facing other generations, and where do you see the opportunities maybe for the generations to unite in addressing them?
I feel that often I see older women being defined by their domestic life as opposed to their achievements that they've made in life. Whether they married, whether they had children, these are all things that define older women as opposed to their achievements. And I think this really creates and enforces the notion that women are meant to be homemakers first and foremost, instead of community leaders, instead of those who engage with their society. I also think unrealistic expectations of aging are put onto older women to remain youthful, to remain young cosmetically, and to cover up the very natural process of aging with cosmetic procedures. And then, at least in the West, I see a complete lack of social security for the older generation, which puts the expectation and like a very forceful expectation of the continuation of labor into later life, just to sustain oneself and just to be able to keep food on the table and a roof over your head, instead of their community and society supporting them in their older age. They have to continue to work and continue to labor.
Absolutely. I mean, at the National Council on Aging, every day we're helping individuals with their health and economic struggles, and we'll tell you the vast majority of which are women. Last year alone, we measurably improved the health and economic security of nearly 6 million older adults, 70% for women. Women that worked hard, contributed, raised the next generation, We're critical to our economy, but so often at a certain age, we are virtually put out to pasture. And those supports and that social security is not enough to make ends meet. And I know, Carol, I have no doubt you have reflections and experiences from your work on the continent in terms of the economic security of women later in life, and would love to hear those, as well as your thoughts on the issues facing the other generations as well.
Okay, now the issues, let me start with the issues facing the other generation. I think I would say that it's like a double-edged sword, because the younger generation right now is living in a place with great technological advancement. It's living in a space where there's a lot of openness that I think society is a lot more open to both than it was before. Like when I was a young girl, there were certain things that I would never imagine doing. For example, there's a lot of the world has opened up, and so a person in a rural village on a Pacific island will probably get to know something that's happening in Eastern Europe. They just need to click on their TV or something. So there's a lot of information, but unfortunately, that has not done away with the real challenges that we spoke about at the beginning that younger women face. We still have the patriarchal underpinnings of society that define how a girl should behave or how a boy should behave. We still have a lot of what do you call it? A lot of direction, a lot of directing younger people in how they should carry out their affairs. And yet we're in a world that is open to experimentation and learning, but we try to hold that back. So I think that's one of the greatest challenges that we have in this space of technological explosion, and we are trying to manage it in ways using ideas and tools that are not aligned to that technological advancement. And that not only confuses the younger generation, but I think it frustrates the younger generation quite some. And so we need to also think about how do we come together as two generations that can build solidarity rather than looking at two generations that are walking apart, the two generations that are walking parallel terms. And maybe the time allowing, I'll speak a bit about that intergenerational solidarity and some of the two ways that I think we could deal with that. But in terms of the issues facing older women economically, socially, we've got laws, cultures that define the laws of many countries in Africa, and I'll speak about Africa. So, for example, the issue of inheritance of land. We are living in a space where we have ratified many international instruments that speak to equality between men and women, equality of the sexes. Yet when it comes to land rights, for example, then countries revert to the cultural laws that were very patriarchal and which deny women access to land. And I speak about land particularly because land is a key resource in agricultural Africa. And so if you have land, you have access to resources. And so if you're denied that access, then it kind of impinges on your ability to create wealth for yourself or to be able to get income that you'll be able to sustain yourself with. Still on land, I want to give a small, just a small example of how land is used to totally subjugate women, older women. So in cultures, because of the pressure of land, we have cultures in Kenya, Malawi, Ghana, Tanzania, and I think bits of Southern Africa, where an older woman who owns land but is a widow has no male relatives, is accused of being a witch. And that's going back to that cultural underpinnings that I spoke about. Witches in culture are supposed to be gotten rid of. So what do? You own land, they want your land, they declare you a witch, they burn you alive and take your land simply because you're an older woman who has no male relative, quote unquote, to support her. So those are some of the real challenges that older women are facing. They don't have access to sustainable pensions because of the way the pension systems are also structured, which will have a small link, dotted line to the cultural way of doing things, where you are expected to be taken care of by your children in old age. It's so warped. And this then predisposes women, especially, to lives of misery when they get to retirement, for example, because they've got no income, they've got no security, they've got no physical security. They can be attacked at any time because they're not supposed to own property. You're too old. Why are you owning that property? You're too old. Why do you want to go to the gym and take care of yourself? You're too old, So all those things then play out and affect how the older women then live their lives. They live lives that are far from being fulfilling because of these challenges.
And it seems so incomprehensible that in 2023, that would be a reality for women.
Yes.
It really illustrates there is serious unfinished business when it comes to shoring up the rights of girls, women, and especially older women. That there's work to be done in terms of elevating those rights as human rights. There's work to be done in terms of being explicit in the sustainable development goals, in terms of women across the lifespan at both bookends, not just those childbearing years. So Carol, would love to get your thoughts on sort of the unfinished business of elevating the rights of girls, women, and older women explicitly at the UN.
Yes, I think the unfinished business we have is building the generational solidarity. I think that's one of the things that we must do, and we must do it with urgency, because we are an aging society. All of us are a minute older than we were a minute ago. And so we will continue growing older. The more we are age blind in our deliberations around the UN in processes such as the UN Commission on the Status of Women, the more we will continue to keep older women at bay and not allow them to enjoy their lives to the full, as was envisaged by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I'd like to look at generational solidarity in two ways. Technology. This year, the CSW is focusing on technology. There's a real and emergent gap in technology between younger and older people. So we've spoken about it over and over during this session. And older women, the world is digitalizing extremely fast. So we need to help older people keep up with the pace, because those who are younger today are going to struggle with these fast technological advances. Many years ago, maybe it looks like many years ago, 20 years ago, I was teaching, my father was about 35 years old. I was teaching my father how to get, what do you call it, to get an internet, an email account. That was that basic. He didn't have it because he didn't have the computer. He didn't grow up in the computer world. He grew up in the typewriter world. And so I was helping him set up an email account. And that looked like such a big thing. At that time, he was around maybe 55. He was about my age today. Now, today, my 9-year-old granddaughter is teaching me things that I never thought were imaginable. 20 years from now, somebody will be teaching a younger person will be teaching my then 29-year-old granddaughter things that she would not have imagined possible. So we must not underplay the power of digitalization, and we must look at the pace of digitalization from an age-inclusive and a life course approach. Because the more we look at digitalization as a problem only faced by older people now, then we will miss the point. It's evolving, and even the younger people will need to keep up with it at some point. So we have to make sure that technology is responsive for all people, because otherwise we'll always have a gap. The second perspective is on advocacy. So advocacy, like I said, is silent when it comes to aging. Whether we're talking human rights generally or specific sexual and reproductive rights, digital rights, or any other class of rights, there's a tendency to think that if we deal with human rights, we've dealt with women's rights. If we've dealt with women's rights, we've dealt with older people, older women's rights. No, it does not automatically incorporate older women. We cannot lump women together as one homogeneous group. We have to push for the inclusion of older women in all advocacy discussions. Older women are excluded because of ageism and sexism. So we have to think about how to include older women in discussions on their rights, but also human rights generally. So when we think about like some of the crises that are bedeviling the world right now, when we think about the Horn of Africa or Ukraine, the drought in the Horn of Africa or the war in Ukraine, and the changes to the ecosystem that it has caused, we don't think of older women or older people as critical actors in that equation, in that continuum. Yet we know that older people are playing a critical role in caring for their families. We know, like in the Horn of Africa, younger men have to now move away from these drought-stricken places, and it's older women particularly who are left to take care of the families. So we have to think about technology, advocacy, human rights from an integrated perspective, and not look at older women or older people as a separate class of people who don't need to be included in the discussions that are going on in spaces such as the UN right now.
Thank you, Carol. That inclusion and that explicit call out of women at all ages and life stages, so critical to ensure the intentionality is there. And let's double down on that topic of technology and the digital divide being this year's theme and all, and also reflecting on the pandemic's lessons that's demonstrated connectivity and technology literacy are so essential. They're the new normal. They're as essential as electricity and water, learning math and reading skills. And yet the pandemic illustrated not everyone has access or ability. And we need to be thoughtful about ensuring that inclusion. And Layla, you would love to hear your thoughts on opportunities to demonstrate how we have more in common across the generations than not when it comes to this theme of digital and your experiences with Girl Scouts in regard to building those skills.
So I think in regards to connecting the generations with technology, female mentorship in getting girls into STEM is so important and so strong. If girls go into STEM programs, whether it's in academics or for recreation, oftentimes they are only surrounded by male peers and male educators, which highly discourages them from actually pursuing STEM. And so to really connect our generations, I think the best move is to create programs that are female-led for girls by girls. So this is my Girl Scout vest. I don't know if we can see it, but it has so many here. I'm not sure how to turn off my background, but I'll try and show you guys some of the patches I have from Tech Things. This is the Society of Women's Engineers. That is when we went to the local university, and this is a program that we do most years, and did STEM projects. Sorry guys, I'm super not familiar with Zoom. I will let my adult figure it out while I
Everything okay on your
Oh, there
end?
we go. Okay, now I can show you guys my vest.
Fabulous.
So this is my Girl Scout vest. And so here are some of my STEM patches. I have the Society of Women Engineers, and this is an event where we bring girls to the local university and have them explore STEM opportunities with other women. And so that year, I think we built a Rube Goldberg machine, which is just like a super intricate set of little machines to create a set of reactions, just to encourage girls to go into STEM. And then I have the Powered Up badge, another STEM focused event, encouraging girls to go into the field and encouraging them to go into activities. And in terms of connecting across the generations in the digital age, this is a little patch from GS NorCal when we connected with our CEO, Marina Park, our former CEO, Marina Park, over Zoom during the pandemic, when we had to do our state conference over Zoom, and that was the only way to connect. So yeah, Girl Scouts really has given me the opportunities to explore STEM that I would not have had otherwise. I live very rural. There aren't the same academic opportunities that are given to urban youth. And so Girl Scouts has allowed me to explore aspects of education that simply would not be available to me otherwise.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I see a new badge brewing, an intergenerational solidarity badge, and in helping us all continue our lifelong learning when it comes to digital skills and digital literacy. It is moving at light speed and so essential that all of us at all ages and life stages have the resources, have the support, are learning from each other so we can keep those skills fresh and remain connected. As we saw during the pandemic, that connectivity is a real lifeline for so many, especially rural individuals, helping women and all of us continue to work, stay connected to friends and family. It is so essential. Well, thank you both for your insights, your reflections, your advice, and we'll turn back to you in just a bit to hear some of your advice and your call to action in regard to making the most of this week's festivities. But I'd now like to turn to Betty Levy to respond to your insights and share with us her thoughts on the intergenerational approach to advocacy when it comes to shoring up the rights of women and girls. So welcome, Betty, and thanks for joining the timely conversation.
Sorry, it wasn't letting me open up, but behind the scenes, they did magic and opened me up. Thank you very much. And I want to thank the committee for inviting me to participate in this amazing panel. I have just been taking notes on notes on notes on places to go and things to do. But I just wanted to start as the elder or the grandmother of the group, since I am the oldest generation here today. I wanted to, hope you'll indulge me, I wanted to share a little bit of my story. And I was born in the 40s and I went to school in the 50s and 60s. And I grew up having civil defense drills where I had to hide under my desk. Today's youth are having active shooter drills here in the United States, and they hide in closets. My generation remembers watching Patterns. Those of you who are old enough to know what I'm talking about, because the TV was only on a few hours a day, we watched Patterns. But we also watched cartoons on 6-inch television screens. Today, the youngest generation from babies are watching cartoons on smartphones and tablets. So they're learning to this. I grew up with the polio epidemic. And in fact, I was a polio pioneer in that I was the vaccines were tested on me, both the oral and the injectable. And today we live with COVID. And I point these things out just to show, while we always think there are differences in generations, we've all go through similar things in a different way. All of this that I was talking about is before there was civil rights, voting rights, abortion rights, and women's rights here in the U.S. I'm sorry. Lost Lake Beach, I demonstrated, I campaigned, I marched for all of the above. And for me, it's very gut-wrenching when I come to the UN, and especially during this CSW, where there's so much regression about language on all of those things that I just mentioned. But I want to focus on some positives, and I wanted to share some of my earliest activist experiences, and they're thanks to the Girl Scouts. I probably was a brownie to a senior scout, as it was called back when I was in scouting. Both experiences that I'm going to share today happened when I was about 13, so a very formative stage of your life. The first was a year-long training course arranged by Girl Scout Council of Long Island, where I grew up, for young girls to learn how to care for people with physical disabilities. And after a year of hands-on training at the Cerebral Palsy Center, we were certified to babysit children with disabilities, with physical disabilities. That didn't work out so good for me. I hated babysitting. But what it did do was I had a career of 40 plus years, as Ramsey already shared, in the mental health and the developmental disabilities world. So it set my course for my life. The second experience is much more dramatic and is the basis for who I am as a person today and why I became an activist. While I don't remember a lot of the details, what I do remember is that we went in the 50s on a Girl Scout troop trip to Washington, D.C. and Virginia. To get there by bus from New York, we had to cross over what we called in the States back then, the Mason-Dixon line, which is what divided segregation from freed. At the time, they were called Negroes. And it was prevalent all over signs, no colored or whites only. And as you can imagine, that was quite a shocking experience to somebody from the North who had not experienced that or had seen that. There was a chaperone on my trip who was of Indian descent. And while she was medium complexioned, she wore saris the whole time of the trip. And I didn't understand that that was a protection for her. Her nephew was along on the trip, and he was not light-skinned. He was fairly dark. And even though we had reservations at restaurants and hotels all along the trip, often when we showed up, we were turned away. He was turned away. And so, of course, we were turned away because we were not able to go places where he couldn't go. That's a lot for a 13-year-old to process and to absorb. And as I said, it really made me who I am today, because that was the first injustice that I saw firsthand, right in my face, walking through a door and being told, no, you can't be served. So at that moment, an activist was born. And I share these stories to point out that children and young adults, what we're exposed to, and I cannot say how much, Leah, you've shared about the opportunities you've had. And that's exactly how lives get formed and changed. Both the amazing speakers have made the same choice I made. And in our own ways, we've all chosen to be activists. 3 generations right here in front of you. And I choose the word activist, although I know Carol was using advocacy and advocate. I'm deliberately using advocate and not using advocate. Advocates and activists are both dedicated to changing the world, but advocates work on behalf of individuals, groups, or organizations, and activists work to spur broader social and political change. And from what I took away from hearing these women, both of them are activists. They are not willing to just sit in the sidelines. The barriers that are reaching women and girls, I don't have much to add. I'm going to try to bring it into context of what's going on in this CSW, because I think, both Carol and Lelia, have been wonderful in pointing them out. I do want to say that it's really important to make the best of your time at CSW. Network with people of your own generation or similar type groups is not the best way. Try to reach out, be intergenerational, correspondence, talk to somebody who maybe doesn't have the same opinion as you on a position. The point, I think both Carol and Leila said, find a buddy or a mentor. That will help you navigate this. CSW is very overwhelming with all the official meetings, the negotiations, the side events, the parallel events. Don't try to do it all. You can't. Figure out, what do you want to get out of CSW? Do you want to make contacts, network, new connections? Then that's what you go for. Don't try to do the negotiations. If you want to learn more about what the opposition or people are doing, then get involved with negotiations. It's really important to understand what is happening, and you can't do it all. I personally only follow the negotiations. I've been working on it for the last 2 weekends because we're about to have on Thursday the second reading, which in UN terms means that there was a text, people looked at it, people got to make consultations, meet with member states, put in input, and there was what then became a compilation text, which is like usually hundreds of pages. Then it got narrowed down to what was called the working text, which was 78 pages. We're now down to about 50 pages. And at the end of we had to submit, everything had to go in by today for any changes to the document. And on Thursday, the next version will come out. And there will be the member states, when they say a reading, that's a member state only meeting. Civil society sits out the door to help with language, but we're not allowed in the room. But it's really important that you know, even if your choice is to do networking, that you understand that not everybody who comes to CSW has the same position, wants the same goals. It's very clear. I'm personally, and I have to disclaimer up front, I'm from a very liberal feminist position and a very progressive position when I talk, but there are people just as adamant as I am on the far right, and they're very organized, very, very organized. So it's really important for you to understand what you're going to hear here. It's not going to be the same from everybody. And you've got to be a little bit prepared for that. And I also suggest you don't engage. Do not get in a one-to-one argument with somebody who has a different position from you, because you're never going to win. They're stuck on their position, you're stuck on yours. Try to listen to them and give back points, but don't argue. Don't engage in that. You're not going to change it. Across the generations, the intergenerational practices, we like to pride ourselves at the UN and think our committees and our groups and our member states look at it this way, but that's not true. And I think it was Carol Ramsey who pointed out that data collection in the UN is 18 to 49. Big gaps left out of what they collect. So this is one of the issues that we are working on at CSW this year, because this year is a year about technology and whatever. We need to learn lessons from each other. We need to work together. We need the enthusiasm and the energy of the youth. We need the knowledge of the adults, and we need the history, wisdom, and guidance of the oldest generation. None of us can do this alone. I want to point out, a few other things, because some of the controversial issues at CSW are not what you would think would be. We have usual that come up every year at CSW, the family versus families, domestic partner versus intimate partner violence, those kinds of things, sexual and reproductive health rights, comprehensive sexuality education. But this year, one of the controversial topics that we're really getting stuck on is the acronym, you'll see it all over the CSW, TFGBV. And it's the TF part, which stands for tech facilitated. That's the controversy right now. The GBV, which is gender-based violence, is always controversial. So that's getting dealt with in the usual way. But there are many, many arguments going on about not using technology facilitated. There are many countries, the more regressive, that want to keep it just narrowed down to online violence. And that doesn't cover some of the things that Leila was talking about when she was talking about what girls experience. Also, in many of the countries, Carol's been having some trouble with her internet connections, and she was talking about some of the issues in Africa. And so in many parts of the world, they're still using the old SMS technology and not smartphones. And so there's text messaging, there's GPS, there is all the other consequences of tech facilitated. There's artificial intelligence, or AI, is another big thing, which discriminates against women and people of color. I don't know how many of you have ever gone into a bathroom where there's a sensor sink and you can't get it to work. And that's because it's not built for either your skin tone or your height. So these are the kinds of discrimination that we're facing with technology, and why it's so important, and why the feminists are fighting with the like-minded countries to try to keep it as tech facilitated this year. The gender-based violence is currently in the description, but there are a number of organizations within the women's world that are fighting against gender-based violence, and they prefer it to be violence against women and girls. Their same split is in with member states. Although GBV, or gender-based violence, is already in agreed conclusions, this is coming up again during this CSW. Gender-based violence is much more inclusive. When you say violence against women and girls, then you're only talking about biological definitions of women and girls. And it's not possible to pick and choose if you're an advocate, an activist working on human rights. You can't pick and choose who has rights. And so we need to be using the most inclusive language we can use. It's very, very important to understand language because language is power. And it's not just semantics. There are nuances, and you need to learn to listen and not just jump and respond to when somebody says something. We need to listen to get the full message so that you can absorb it, take it in, and know how to move forward with that language. I also remember the UN they have the 6 official language, but there's thousands of languages. I was at a session yesterday where somebody from Greenland was talking about how many languages there just was in that little country alone. So you have to remember that English is the language used in negotiations. And so it's not everybody's first language, and they have to translate in their mind as they're negotiating what words mean in their own language. And so we get into these false kinds of security that we all agree, and then all of a sudden we realize we're not saying the same thing. So you have to learn, how to listen about that. I just wanted to go back to a few of the things, and I'm just wrapping up, Ramsey, but I do want to point out a few of the things that Carol brought up, because it also comes up when we're talking about tech and stuff like that. And that is some of the gender-based, and also lately you brought it up about your grandparents' experience. And that is, we do have a gender pay gap. Still, women are not earning the same amount of money for equal kinds of work. Women have gender pension gaps. Carol mentioned the inheritance issues and the land and not having rights to monies or the houses. But there's also that because women earned less money through their lives, their pensions are less, which makes women have to work longer. Women not given the opportunity, and older women especially, to learn new skills as we see our world becoming more automated and more technically challenging for older people. They're not being given the same opportunities to be re-educated. So they end up leaving jobs before they're ready financially to leave jobs. So all of this impacts on how people can live out their lives. So it's very important to start at that younger generation, making sure they have all those skills. I loved what you said about getting girl-led or women and girl-led STEM programs going, because yes, it's male role models who are invested in the patriarchy. And so we need to do that kind of stuff. And I think I'll wrap up there. And I hope I responded.
Well, that was fabulous, Betty. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your advice and for drawing the parallels among the experiences of the generations. It really is incredible when you reflect on the experiences that different generations had and how much more in common we have if we just reframe what those experiences are at their core. So thank you so very much. And I imagine folks may have questions for Betty and her incredible experience and understanding of the UN and the opportunity before us with CSW, as well as with Leila and with Carol. So here is your opportunity. Go ahead and put questions in the chat if you'd like to share them. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off and would like to start with you, Betty, and just explore a little bit further your point. And I see Rochelle in the chat shared, language is power. You really, really have driven that home, that language and the nuance of language, it is so essential. Would love to get your reflections on CEDAW in particular and the language and the lack thereof when it comes to the bookend generations. Is there unfinished business when it comes to CEDAW in terms of its silence on girls and older women, just as an addendum, if you will? What are your thoughts on that and your advice to us?
I don't say just an addendum. I think, we have to remember when CEDAW was written, it was a different time. And I see the addendums, and there are many, many addendums. Yesterday at the session that I was talking about, the indigenous person from Greenland kept talking about the addendum 39 about indigenous people. And I do believe that CEDAW is trying to open up, and as new things come up, do them. So that's why I don't see addendums as just addendums. I see them, as, that's, I know it's been big news all around the world about, what just happened in America with Roe versus Wade, but that was an addendum. That was an important addendum. So we shouldn't underestimate that. I think it's very, very important, though, for people to engage at their local and national level and at those consultations when your country is up for their CDOR or their universal peer review as well, so that those points about girls and older women can be made, to the forefront. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Something I was just saying reminded me of something I missed saying, but I'll think of it, I'm sure.
Well, it's a powerful reminder. An addendum is a step in the right direction, and we must take it as that and keep pushing, keep pushing. So thank you. And again, it's your time as an audience. If you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. One other issue you raised, Betty, that I wanted to explore, please.
I'm sorry, I
Go
remember.
right ahead.
One of the other very controversial, it's controversial many years, but it's really rearing its face again this year a lot, is child rights versus parents' rights. Now, there is no such thing in the global policy world as parents' rights. There is, a convention on the rights of the child. So it's the way of the far right to try to limit what children can do, what decisions they can make, especially about bodily autonomy and some of those other things, by trying to push in parents' rights. So I meant to point that out.
And your point about conventions and rights, I think it's of note to recognize, unfortunately, the U.S. has not ratified CEDAW or pretty much any of the conventions or treaties the UN has developed. And what's your advice as advocates and activists are reflecting on that reality?
I'm sorry, just say that again.
And what's your advice in terms of the reality that the U.S. government hasn't ratified CEDAW or pretty much any convention?
Okay. Well, the U.S. government is a very interesting member of the UN. They're the host country. They have a permanent seat on the Security Council. They are the biggest funder of the UN. They are the very significant funders in undeveloped countries, of AIDS projects. And so they wield this incredible power. That said, they don't want anybody looking at them. The answer back is often that we hear from the American diplomats as well. We have stronger laws in America that protect those rights. We have very strong laws on disabled persons. We have very strong laws on this, that, and the other. So the United States is not part of the International Criminal Court. The United States only does UPR. They're not part of CEDAW. They haven't signed on to children's rights. They have not. They probably will not sign on if there ever is a convention for older persons. They just want to bully. It's the best word to say. They want, they often tell countries, if you go along with that, we are not going to fund you. If you go along that, we're not going to do this. So I have to say that people who work at the mission here in New York really believe in their hearts that these are not the right things that I'm just saying there about bullying, but the right things. They are very strong on language for women. They're very strong for language on girls because they feel it's already here in the United States. But those decisions are made by attorneys in our State Department. They are not made at the mission level.
Well, thanks for helping us understand the lay of the land and those realities as everyone navigates trying to bring the best energy and activism to bear. And it looks like we do have a question. Cynthia Stewin, if you'd like to go ahead and share your questions. Welcome, Cynthia, from the NGO Committee on Aging.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you, the panelists and moderator and discuss it. It's been fabulous. Something that triggered for me was, we really are talking intergenerationally, but I'd really like to ask Liliana about the point being somebody born today can potentially is expected to live to be 100 in the developed world. That's a very long time. Is there thought processes going on there about how you train, you need to retrain, you need to retool, but that requires a very large transformation. The other side of it is we're looking at many cohorts of older persons who are living so much longer. And so we're in some ways still lumping older women all together. But there are 60-year-olds, there are 70-year-olds, there are 80-year-olds, there are 90-year-olds, and there's such diversity. And I think that's another very big challenge for all of us. And I'd welcome any and all of your wisdom and thoughts on those two things. Thank you.
Great point, Cynthia. And Lily, would you like to respond? It is quite a horizon before you with your likelihood to live to be 100. What a gift.
Right, of course. Just as we can't treat youth as a monolith, of course, we can't treat older women as a monolith. Experiences are going to shift so deeply from decade to decade, from year to year. The way that I think that type of shift in diversity that you talked about that happens within the older generation happens again in the youth, but at a much more rapid rate as development happens so quickly in the young age, in the teenage years. The needs of a 13-year-old girl are completely different than the needs of a 19-year-old girl. And you're right, there is so much transformation. And I think that kind of goes along with what I said earlier in regards to the lack of social security that exists for older women and older people, and truly understanding the needs of each generation, not just the older generation, but the generations within there and what each diverse need is.
Thank you. And Carol, would you like to weigh in on that one as well?
Yes, maybe just to build on what Lelia has said about even within generations, we have diversity. And I think that's one, I did touch on it a little bit earlier, that when we speak of women, we seem to think that they're homogeneous. And when we look at the age cohorts of women across the life course, then we tend to think that all teenage girls are the same, have the same needs. All young adult women are the same and have the same needs as you continue onwards up to the older ages. And so we need to deal with that. We need to be able to look at individuals, because then when we look at rights, it's the right of an individual. It's not, there are group rights, but we must recognize that they're individual rights. And so we have to look at older women as older women and look at the diversities that still exist for older women the same way we do for younger women across the ages. So I think that's very important.
That intersectionality and the explicit focus of the intersectionality. Looks like we have one final question, and Erica Dar with AARP, I welcome and invite you to go ahead and unmute if you'd like and to share.
Hi, Ramsey, brilliant job moderating, and oh my gosh, this has been so inspiring. Lovely to see you, Leila, and just so optimistic of you being one of our champions throughout your life course. What a find. Unbelievable. And of course, Carol and Betty, who I know and I'm in awe of. Question for all of you is, At the UN, we tout intergenerational solidarity. Member states constantly talk about it. But when they do, they somehow seem to just focus on the youth end of things. CSW, for example, people who are on this call right now are all cognizant of the fact that older women are completely invisible in the program. Very rarely do we see mention of older women being made, except for side events like ours and our partners. So, Leila, sorry to put this on you, but I am so intrigued. We're struggling with this. So I'm going to ask you, and then also Ramsey, all the others, Betty and Carol, how do we change this? How do we get older women more visible at CSW? Thank you.
I think you're completely right. I think when people say intergenerational, they mean middle-aged people and youth. And they do forget the older generation and all of its wisdom and all of its knowledge that it has to bring to our communities. I think moving forward, events like these with youth and older women on calls to talk to each other, hopefully in-person events if we can, being able to discuss and connect in the future, hopefully on more really targeted, focused issues and less in a broad sense as today was. And then making sure that youth understand the importance of the contributions of the older generation, because health and equity don't just exist, again, from the ages of 18 to 49. A woman is not just oppressed the day she turns 18. It begins at birth and it continues until death. And so I really think we need to connect youth with older generations. And, you know, as a young person, I can say, I think a lot of times when people say older generations, in our brain, it stops at like 50. And so like really bringing in older women into the conversation and bringing them to the table and making sure we all have an equitable seat in the conversation, I think is my goal at least.
How beautifully put. And why don't we go ahead and take this opportunity, Carol and then Betty, to share your thoughts as sort of closing remarks as well. So Carol, please.
Thanks, Ramsey. I think to Erica's question, and Erica, is good to see you all the way virtually. I think to your question on how do we get them, we only hear about younger people at the UN. I think it's because as a society, we are not prepared for aging. We are not ready to age, and yet we're an aging society, even if I say that at the risk of repetition. How do you get your presence felt? And I'll give you a little anecdote from my own life. I have 8 brothers, and I grew up, I had 8 brothers and 1 sister. My sister came way after me, and we lived with relatives, we lived with cousins, and they're all male. So there was a danger of getting totally lost in this male world. And so to make my presence felt, my dad gave me a few tips. And one of it was, he said, no, we're not going to change anything. You have to live with them. So there are certain things that I had to do to make my presence felt, because I was in the extreme minority. There are many things that older people can do. We have tools at our disposal. Older people and those advocating for the rights of older people must make their presence felt. The UN is not going to invite us to the table. We must go to the table ourselves. We must invite ourselves to the table. And how do we do this? In the CSW, one of the things that we must do for the next session, maybe we missed the boat this time around, is to have as many sessions as possible speaking about the rights of older people. 1. Number 2, we must have older people, older women come to the CSW, and we must make it possible and easy and convenient for them to come to the CSW and speak. We must give them the voice and the agency to speak about the issues that affect them. Because we're not going to change the situation of excluding older people if we sit by the sidelines and keep waiting to be invited to the table. We must go to the table. We have the voice, we have the means, we have the power, we have the movement. So we must bring the movement virtually and physically to the UN spaces so that the issues of older people can be brought in. Then finally, the issues of older people do not engage in a vacuum. And so we must integrate and embrace the spirit of intersectionality and intergenerational engagement, such as we're doing now, so that even in the spaces that are not meant for older people, we bring in the issues through the intersectional engagement, because after all the young people are older people in waiting. And therefore, it is in their best interest that the issues of older people are addressed in their issues as well from an integrated way.
Older people in waiting. That's our future self always. And Betty, before I give you the last word, I did want to address one question we got in the chat, and Carol or Betty would be interested in having you weigh in. Has the issue of elder abuse in women ever been addressed at CSW? Carol or Betty, are you able to respond to that one?
Yes.
Thank you.
I also want to respond to the other one. So I did currently in this version, which is now being reworked, there are sections that include older women. One of the things I neglected to say before is that what the UN tends to do is make lists. The member states, they make what we call lists. You know, they'll say a para and then they'll say, and such and such, such and such, such and such. And so older women is included in some of that. The Women's Rights Caucus has been very forceful this year with our meetings with the different member states and groupings that we include in those lists, besides girls, singling out adolescent girls, because the point that they made before about a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old have different issues, and older women. So we have been pushing that. We have found a lot of like-minded countries who are supporting that. But I do want to say that it's very important when you're reading stuff, not to just look if the word older women or older persons is there, to really, or girls or adolescent girls, whatever, you really need to delve in and look at what the language is saying, because sometimes it's not good that it's put in there because it's really marginalizing or lessening the significance it has on a population. And so those are the kinds of lessons when I say listen. You also listen is also when you're reading, you know, what is being there. And don't accept language that's not the best language. You know, we just had the Women's Rights Caucus just had a meeting with UN Women to talk about the tech facilitated GBV. And one of the things we said to them is, you know, we don't know that having an agreed conclusion at any cost is worth it. And they were kind of shocked to hear that. But bad language does not help Layla and her children's generation. So,
well, thank you. And thank you for the last words. It's been such a valuable time we've had together to hear from each of you, to have this perspective across the generations, and to really help energize the audience in thinking about making the most of the festivities this week. Together, we must elevate the issues of women and girls at all ages and life stages. We must be intentional about our language, the nuance, the need to recognize the intentionality. It's so critical and so important because our grandmothers and our mothers deserve better. Our daughters deserve better. We all do. And so it's been such a pleasure to be able to moderate this conversation together to really highlight some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, but frankly, the need for us all to work together for the intergenerational solidarity when it comes to recognizing the rights of women and girls across the generations. I want to thank all of you for joining us. A special thanks to our contributors to this panel, as well as the NGO Committee on Aging Subcommittee on Older Women, and Robin in particular for her leadership, Susan Summers, Erica Udao, and Rochelle Mazzario for all their support on making this webinar possible. And also a special thanks to the Girl Scouts USA and Ajua Adu for bringing us an incredible representative. Leilu, thank you for your time, for your insights, and the hope that you bring to the work for all of us. I wish everyone a productive CSW, and thank you for your advocacy and activism. We're in this together. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to meet you, Lania and Betty. And thanks, Robin, for excellent moderation as usual.
And have a wonderful, successful CSW, everybody.
Yes, and all of you, successful CSW.
Thank you so much. Have a great one, guys.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you all.